I'd like to reconvene the regular council meeting for November 5th. Our delegation hasn't arrived, so we'll just move on with the agenda and break after an item if when they arrive, if that works for everybody. Okay, so we'll go straight into 18.1, 2024 Housing Needs Report. Mr. Dulwich?
Thank you, Worship. So we do have our consultants, Urbanics Consulting, on the call with us. We have Brendan Daw, Vice President from Urbanics Consulting, who will be presenting the presentation and the findings from our most recent housing needs report. Just before I pass it off to Brendan, I have a couple introductory remarks here. So through financial support from grant funding received from the BC Ministry of Housing, as well as due to the legislated time frame to complete an interim housing needs report by the end of this year, put on us from the province. This is the reason why we moved forward with this project in 2024, and have drafted now for council's consideration the 2024 housing needs report. The draft report is in council's package as attachment 1. The draft report does comply with provincial legislation, which Brendan will go into, which was enacted in November of 2023 last year. And it requires the District of Summerland to estimate our 5-year projected housing needs, as well as our 20-year housing needs for our community over the next 20 years. And as further to that, for us to then include those projections and to ensure that we're zoning our community to allow for those housing units to be added to our community within our OCP by the end of next year, and also further to that to do a zoning bylaw amendments to include that housing supply. So some of the key findings, I don't want to steal a lot of Brendan's thunder here, but I wanted to share a couple of key findings from my perspective from Urbanics report. Population is expected to grow to 13,890 people in the District of Summerland by the year 2041. And this represents a pretty moderate growth rate for our community. Definitely kind of been the norm for our community if you look historically, of around 0.5% increase. As well, kind of interesting to me is the demographics change expected from increasing numbers of people moving into our community that are over the age of 65, but a declining trend in the population of kids aged 15 years and under in our community. Another couple other items, the housing needs supply to address homelessness is expected to be 67 residential units over the next 20 years, and that our total housing need for our community is projected to be 2,212 residential housing units, and that would be new housing units that we would require in our community by the year 2041. So with that, it's like some of the key findings that I thought was pretty important to highlight. Definitely want to pass it on now to Brendan to roll through his presentation. Thanks, Brendan. Brendan, do you want to share your screen? Oh,
sure. Let me hold this up.
Sure, that'd be great.
I'll do this as a presentation from here. Oops, wrong button. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. Thanks, Brendan.
Oh, hi. So my name is Brendan Daw. I am Vice President of Urbanics Consultants. I'm here in the evening on behalf of my colleague Claire McQuarrie Jones, who led this project on our end. And we wanted to talk about the District of Summerland's housing needs report for 2024. Now I'll just jump right in here. So our methodology is based upon two factors: what we counted and what we heard. We drew upon data from Statistics Canada, especially the last four federal censuses, BC Stat, particularly house population predictions and population forecasts, CMHC, especially for rental market data, as well as additions from Summerland and other sources of data. In addition, we spoke to numerous stakeholders, and we conducted an online community survey that reached out to 383 resident for complete responses. So this gives us both a quantitative and a qualitative examination of the housing conditions in the Summerland. I do want to stress some of the limitations. So the methodology here is one that was handed down to all the municipalities and regional districts in British Columbia by the province. And it does have some, to some extent, it is useful to have this cross comparison that you can sit down and look at every municipality in the province and compare them side by side. But at the same time, this projection does not mean that anyone can just go out there and will be able to viably construct the 2,212 units of housing that the projection estimates that the city needs. Some key issues involved include some of the inputs are circular. Now, you might notice that the largest driver of 20-year housing need is anticipated population growth, 1,139 units out of 2,212. Anticipated population growth is based upon the province's people projection modeling system. And what that does is that bakes in a lot of past decisions about how growth is going to be conducted into the future. So if you were a jurisdiction that did not permit a lot of housing, then the model would assume that you would not have a lot of household growth in the future, and vice versa. Another limitation is the demand factor, which is applied to municipalities in particular, also called additional local demand. And the demand factor is something of a black box. The province has not really documented how they came up with these numbers. You just go look them up and the province tells you, here's the demand factor for your municipality. I've talked to people involved who have suggested that this was something of a fudge factor to get numbers more where the province wanted them. Other people have told me that it's related to an estimate of your existing density to potential density. But again, it's a very mysterious number, and it drives a very substantial proportion of the housing needs assessment. And I wish I had a better answer for that, but I try as I might, I do not. Lastly, or not lastly, but homelessness units. Now, those are based upon an apportionment of regional homeless needs, not on Summerland specific numbers. The Summerland homelessness count is smaller than the number of units estimated here because this is based on the regional district numbers, and that's a methodological issue. And lastly, the numbers just take in a lot of past practices, past happenings into the future, and this creates some limitations. It's not a market assessment; it's a machine for producing comparable housing needs assessments, and so that's where we are. So I just want to look at some of the.
Could I just ask a question on the demand factor?
Absolutely.
Are you suggesting that, I mean, I think in most places in the Okanagan, you build it and they will come sort of thing, and that's not really taken into account? I mean, but here, recent history is anything that's built is soon occupied, and you just can't build fast enough. So that doesn't really take to what you're saying with the mystery demand factor. It doesn't really take that into account.
Well, indirectly does. For instance, suppressed household formation is a measurement of, and I think a very good thing to include in the projection that to a certain extent will measure how many fewer households your population is producing than it would if there was more housing for them. But I think that is a very real concern.
Sorry to interrupt, Brandon. Sorry to interrupt. We're having a really hard time hearing you. It's a bit garbled. I don't know if there's anything you can do at your end there.
Okay, let me try and adjust the microphone here. Apologies. Is that better?
Yes, that's better.
Okay, my apologies. Sharing screen. So sorry about that. So okay. So yeah, I would say that the build it and we will come factor really comes into the population projection feature, or in the sense that it really relates to that quite strongly, because if you have just sort of been willing to build things to let people come, then your past migration patterns, which feed into the province's population projection, will be larger than if you had been stingier with housing. The province treats this as sort of a natural outcome rather than one that's downstream of planning decisions, and it makes a lot of impact on what the housing needs assessment ends up being in this case. The largest component here being the population projection there, and so yeah, I think that is a you shouldn't take this as an argument that if you build it, they will come less than 2,000 units. I think that still very much is the case. This should not be seen as anything approaching a ceiling, but really much more of a floor. Does that help?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Okay. Here we are. What we counted. Yeah, so just wanted to discuss some of the things we counted. As there has been quite substantial population growth in recent years, especially since 2011, and especially in the previous 5 years. And as we know, since the 2021 census, growth rates have been quite large in the region. We've looked at extensive arrays of census data regarding the current situation and economic situation, demographic situation in the district of Summerland, which are detailed in the report. We included the census forecasts going forward, or the BC stats forecast going forward. And these are a quite substantial amount of the housing needs involved. We also looked, so here's some of the other features that we looked at here. As Brad mentioned, the projected demographic change in the district is a very important outcome, and I would say that is probably one of the more reliable parts of the provincial population forecast. It's based upon expected birth rates, death rates, migration rates, and so an aging population does bring with it different housing needs. Certainly needs for seniors housing, quite literally, less need for more family size housing, but also in the typology, housing that people with mobility needs can more easily get around, housing that fits various medical needs. It's housing that's perhaps less reliant upon being able to drive everywhere as a means of travel. And so in that situation, it does create some quite substantial planning implications going forward. We'd also like to discuss the housing needs. So as it was said, 2,212 units over 20 years. This is primarily driven by the population forecast, which I really can't help but drive home is that it's something of a circular estimate, but it is also a reliable guide to past practice moving into the future. So that we should expect that this 2,012 units is comparable to other you can compare this to other jurisdictions. So just to discuss some of the other components of the housing needs assessment here, extreme core housing need. So extreme core housing need is the portion of the households that are spending greater than 50% of their income on housing. And it's expected that these 108 households will simply need new housing, that their current situation is not one that can just be improved more passively.
Sorry, interrupt, Brendan, just have a question here. Councillor Peak.
Thank you very much, Brenda. I realize that looking at the statistics, the projection is that there will be more seniors housing needed. In looking at the capture of the comments from the people that put in survey notices with written responses, the fact is that people are looking to have the opportunity for younger people to live here. How does that get projected in what you're speaking of?
That is a great question. And so one of the things I would make note with is the suppressed household formation, which really not necessarily true in every jurisdiction, but often tends to reflect the fact that people are forming households at an older age. They're moving out less. They're not setting out on their own as much as they would otherwise. And I think that is a very interesting feature that the province included in the methodology. And the way that was calculated was to go back to 2006 and use that as an anchor point for each municipality to try and figure out, broken out by age, by tenure, by cohort, how much less likely people are to establish their own households in 2021 than that age group would have been in 2006. And so I think that really does speak to the extent to which young people are not being accommodated in the present housing market. So in this case, it's the estimate is that 306 units are needed to address suppressed household formation. The wider issue, I'd say, is that does speak to some of the limits of the methodology here. I wish that I could tell you that we have the best methodology, but this is the methodology that the province has decreed that all the municipalities should use. And it's an opportunity to provide more options, to be more flexible, to enable greater facilitation than might otherwise have been the case, is the best way I can put it.
Mr. Dalvin just has a comment.
Yeah, thanks, Brendan. I just want to, and through the chair to Councillor Peak, add to your answer there to her question. I think the way we can evaluate this report is kind of like a base case scenario for our community moving into the future. And this is good information for us to understand trends and where we are headed as a community if things, don't change into the future, and that we have no agency in how we make those changes. But we are planning to do an official community plan next year, and I think this information will be very helpful for us in kind of guiding, well, what kind of community do we need to accommodate for the people that are coming into our community? And so that's kind of the best way to frame this study, is a picture of using all the stats and data that we have at today's fingertips, and then projecting that forward into the next 20 years as to what kind of community do we expect we'll have here in Summerland. But we have an opportunity to make changes. And I think that's where the aspirational piece of an OCP comes in.
Okay, follow up.
Thank you very much, Brad, and thank you, Brenda. But I have a question in regard to the summary. I wanted to know what the difference in the definition of the supply of new housing units, including market ownership and market rental, to address anticipated population growth is estimated at 1,139 new housing units. And then the next bullet, I don't know what the difference between these two bullets really are. The words don't mean something to me. A supply of new housing units to address anticipated new housing demand in the next 20 years is 584 units. So what's the difference between those definitions? They're close to the same thing. If you could help me out with that, it would make a difference.
Okay. So we were talking about the 1,139 units. That is based upon, if you go to the province's forecasts of population growth or household growth in this case, that's what that is. That translates into 1,139 units over the coming years needed to accommodate how the district would grow based upon past practice and current demographics. The 584 units, that reflects additional local demand. Now, additional local demand, also known as the demand buffer, is what I was speaking to when I introduced the limitations, is the mystery black box factor that the province has handed down for every municipality. And try as I might, I have talked to various people involved in the construction of provincial estimates. I have gotten somewhat evasive answers that I was told could not be filled out because of the ongoing election at the time. That this is, not something that's well explained. It's not well documented. It's an estimate that might have something to do with density, but I wish that I could say it is a very strange way that they have done this, is the best I can say, but it's something that they think is beyond local demand or I guess beyond local assessments that the province thinks that every municipality has to address.
Boy, I can see that you had your work cut out for you to try to make sense out of all that. It's a little bit of smoke and mirrors, but I'm beginning to understand why you're making those statements. Thank you.
My apologies for that. I do wish I could answer that question more fully.
Okay, no, all good. Just carry on.
Okay. So as I was speaking, we've addressed extreme poor housing need, persons experiencing homelessness, suppressed household formation, which I spoke to is the comparison to 2006 and ability of people to form households, anticipated growth, which we've spoken to. The rental vacancy rate adjustment is the one that I have not spoken to. This is basically the number of, they took the CMHC vacancy rate for the area, applied it to the number of rental houses according to the census, and estimated how many additional housing units you would need to reach a healthy rate. Methodologically, it's not entirely how rental vacancy works, but nonetheless, it does add, in this case, 6 units to the housing needs count and additional local demand. So that's the meat of this. This is what the province wanted everyone to get done by the end of the year. And so I'd also like to speak into some of the things that we have heard. And if you go through some of the raw responses.
Sorry, Brandon, just before you jump into that, we have another question here from Councillor Barkwell.
Thank you, Worship. I was wondering about this rental vacancy adjustment. Is that 6 units? Is that sort of like we need 6 additional units over what would normally be supplied in the next 20 years? Or, I mean, I look at 5% and I thought, well, okay, or 5, the number 5, how well what's a target vacancy rate? And this is just units. And so can you relate it to a vacancy rate or anything?
Yes, the target vacancy rate is 3%. This is I think in my professional experience, a pretty good rule of thumb for a healthy rental vacancy rate in the Canadian context. And so you can see this number as how many extra units are between the current vacancy rate and the target vacancy rate, in this case 6, which suggests that the rental vacancy problem is not especially troubling in Summerland. That said, this is something of a methodologically problematic number because, units don't just, you don't just add housing and that solves the vacancy, or you don't just add 6 units and that solves the vacancy rate problem because they stop being vacant because, as we all know, people move into them. Nonetheless, it's in the most part, it's not a large driver of a lot of the housing needs assessments. And I think that achieving a healthy vacancy rate really speaks to more addressing, the demand factor, population growth, and that sort of approach. Councillor
Barkwell.
There.
Sorry, Councillor Barkwell, go ahead.
Okay, I wasn't sure if he was finished. The other disturbing stat you've given us is, or maybe you really haven't given it to us yet, but the number of 0 to 14-year-olds, the actual absolute number going down as well as a percentage of the population. Is there any suggestions in here how we would address that? I've always said, okay, seniors are great, and they're a good, reliable industry, but we can't have the absolute numbers of 0 to 14s going down. I mean, it has huge impacts on the character of the community. And any insights there on that? Besides more counselors having more babies?
If I may, I mean, it's a matter of being an attractive place for the parents of 14 to 0 to 14-year-olds to live and to work. Whether that be in terms of the availability of adequately sized housing, or in terms of economic strength. That's really what's in the ambit of local government ability there. I would note, for instance, that that some of the reforms coming down the pipe, you may have heard about the single stair reforms that the province has been pushing. And so one of the things that would enable would be, it just makes it logistically easier to have, say, 2 and 3 bedroom apartments in multifamily units, which makes the cost of having kids and living in a place with kids somewhat less than it would be otherwise. Now, it's a lot of little things to make everything just slightly more family friendly that adds up to there just mechanically being more families. And I wish there isn't. I don't think there's a big policy answer there. Just lots of small incremental changes that make that add up to more 0 to 14.
Okay, Mr. Delvin has something to add, I believe.
Yeah. If I can, through your worship to Council Parkville, I'll kind of put on my policy hat and kind of, as I look at that as a key finding, I think it is really good, important information coming out of this study. As I said earlier, we can treat this study as a base case scenario of what this community's trends are moving forward. And unfortunately, these demographic trends are happening regardless of things outside of our control. Housing costs increasing, more seniors moving into our community, raising the prices of housing across our community and pushing families out. Those trends are happening in our community currently. And if we don't do things to address those things, we can expect this trend to continue moving forward and resulting in less kids being in our community in 20 years from now. So I think that this is an important learning for us as a community, and I appreciate Urbanics driving this key finding out from their analysis, because this will help us, and then just continuing this discussion as we get into official community plan review. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you for that. Councillor Peak.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Brenda, I understand that you're looking at how you read these things, but when I look at the vacancies, we need more rental properties. We need more than 6. It's also a struggle for the cost of the rental units that are here. So market costs for a 1-bedroom is $1,700. It's extremely high. We have our first affordable housing project going in. The relevance of saying a vacancy is only 6 just seems preposterous. And I understand what Brad's saying, that this is a base reading. I just think it's a distorted base reading.
You are 100% correct, Councillor. This is the methodology that the province has handed down to us in some respects has a lot of flaws. I mean, I wouldn't say that it says you only need 6 rental apartments. That's not what it's saying. I mean, it says you need 2,212 units, and some percentage of those are going to be apartments, and that will contribute to improving the rental vacancy rate. But it is definitely, I think Brad is quite correct in pointing out that this is a sort of, it's anchored to a base case. If you just sort of kept on doing what you were doing, you would create these sorts of pressures. And if you can do things differently to bring down the marginal cost of home building, to improve access for families, to reduce cost pressures and increase competition and supply growth, as well as facilitating non-market housing outcomes, that some of these curves that look quite ugly can be bent the other direction. It just requires all of our local governments in the region to be working in the same direction, and hopefully some wider headwinds that can help curtail some of the forces that are out there to push against that.
Okay, Councillor Betts has a question.
And thank you so far for your presentation. And my question is it's building on the data that you're already presenting to us, but I'm looking at your population projections, noting that they're from the BC Stats and the population estimates and projections from 2024. But I'm wondering how both our aging populations up until the year 2041, as well as ultimately declining boomer populations, how is that factored in? Can you speak to that? Because it's not only taking a look at how do we bend certain curves to encourage families and such to move in, but it's that our whole population curve is going to be shifting. And I've been reading through the document, and I haven't really been seeing information speaking to that factor, which is, while morbid, a distinct reality of an aging population.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm quite happy to speak to that. So the model is based upon the province's PEOPLE, P-E-O-P-L-E, creative and acronym projection system. And it's a cohort replacement demographic model based on a actuarial estimate of expected births and deaths anchored to the most recent census for each population cohort in the area. And then there is an adjustment based on expected rates of migration, which is what I was mentioning, bakes in some of your past planning decisions there. And then if the province is aware that, say, a mill is going to close or some other major demographic impact, they might add that into the mix to tweak it a bit. But the primary drivers of the people population projection are very much that aging of the population cohorts in the existing demography of a given community. And so it's it is baking in that there is a certain population of senior citizens, a declining overall birth rate, and that large sort of cohort of boomers moving through society and moving higher in the age tables each year. And so that's what that's based on is, and how that projection is estimated going forward.
Okay, thank you. I think you can carry on.
Okay. So I did want to speak to some of the things that we'd heard from residents. I think that there's a lot of quite stirring concerns have been expressed, especially regarding affordability. You can note that complaints that first-time home buyers are unable to afford to enter the market without leaving Summerland. That there are very high prices, very limited rental options for a young family. That there are an absence of affordable housing for seniors. That housing options are not accessible for young workers and families. But also concerns of neighborhood change approaching parts of the communities in Summerland, concerns about where things might be. And so we've certainly heard some recommendations from the community, be it about infilling of empty lots or the importance of infrastructure, the need for more family-friendly rentals, townhouses, apartments, issues regarding administrative red tape. And so those are just some of the specific statements we heard. There's quite a colorful and I think informative selection of individual comments in there, in addition to our expansive housing needs survey, which had, as I mentioned, 384 respondents. So just to summarize some of the key moving forwards here is several areas of local need. This is a key part of the assessment here. And so we spoke to the need to enhance housing diversity. Like many communities in British Columbia, Summerland could always use more apartments, more townhouses, more options for varying types of need, varying price points, options that make more efficient use of the limited land base that many BC communities are facing with. There's a need for the facilitation of non-market housing. Now, one might like that the province has given everyone account of how much non-market housing they need, and that means the province has promised to fund it, but unfortunately, that doesn't seem to mean that. And so they'll be looking at municipalities to do what they can to facilitate these projects, be it with enhanced fees or preferential process through the permitting process, but that is definitely issues that can be done to improve the non-market housing situation. And to prepare for changes in the demographics. That is, as we mentioned, there is, if you can facilitate the movement of young families into Summerland, you will still have a growing number of seniors over the age of 65, and they are going to have different needs than we've seen in the past in these communities. So thank you for your time this evening, Mayor, councillors, and I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Okay, thanks, Brendan. Council, any further questions? I think we maybe ran through them all during the presentation. Councillor Peak.
Brenda, recognizing both the strengths and the weaknesses of this particular housing report, it will answer the need that the province has given us as having a housing report to base our assumptions on as we move forward. And that really was a good portion of what we were looking for. Is that correct?
This satisfies this is both the interim housing needs report that needed to be completed by 2024, or by the end of 2024, as well as the full scale housing needs report that needed to be completed by 2028, I believe. So.
Thank you very much, Brenda.
Mr. Delvin?
If I can, through your worship, a question to Brendan. We were required to update our housing needs report now through legislation every 5 years. Correct me if I'm wrong. So
correct.
This would be now setting the clock. If council was to give approval of it tonight, for us to move forward with this information to include it in our planning documents for the next 5 years.
Thank you. I think, this is, thanks, Brendan, for pointing out the flaws. I think that's really good to know. I think, this is just one piece of the puzzle, and with our OCP review coming up and with our own local knowledge around the table here, I think it's all good information that we can use going forward. Councillor Betts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So one thing I'm just kind of reflecting on in saying that is that we here at the table today have discussed what the limitations of some of the methodology are. But if anybody reviews this OCP and we aren't sitting at the table, they're just going to take it at face value. So is there a way to, add a little bit of information, just a little bit of context to the beginning of the document about where the limitations of the methodology stand, how it's maybe a guiding document rather than a defining principle on how we exactly fulfill our housing needs? I'm just seeing a gap here between what we received today and how it will be read in 8 years or in 5 years, frankly.
Mr. Delvin?
Yeah, to your worship, to Councillor Betts. Although I do agree with Brendan, and I haven't talked too much of my perspective on the methodology on this, and I have my concerns. I've spoken at length with Brendan on this through this process as to what the province has dictated we have to do. I do think we are going to get good information to include in the OCP, and the biggest kind of projection that I would kind of encourage council to review is that 2,120 units that are required, 2,212 units that are required in the next 20 years. That is ultimately what the province is wanting us to be aware of as well when we get into the OCP review, is that we can't just keep our community at the status quo with the current zoning in place and still accommodate that growth. That growth has to happen somewhere. So we need to have a discussion as a community as to where that growth should occur. But I think the methodology, unfortunately, is got flaws in it. It will, I think other communities are going to struggle with it as well, not just us. But we are going to need to grow as a community, and it's providing us some information as how we're going to grow as a community over the next 20 years.
Councillor Trainer.
Brad, thanks a lot for summing that up. I think a lot of times we see these things, and I mean, I heard the frustration when it was being presented. These kind of reports, they come, and I mean, no one's going to look at this in 10 years, like it's going to be out of date, right? And, but I think what you just said is that the idea that we need to start thinking, okay, we're going to need about 2,000, and here's the kind of direction that we're going in terms of our population. I think that that helps us when we go to do our OCP. But in terms of the details of this, like, you know, I mean, you take it for what it is, and you take the guiding principles out of it. And then, like the mayor said, you use the rest of the picture or the rest of the details in your experience to help fill in when you go forward with the OCP. But you are right, like knowing that we have to have about 2,000, I think helps us when we go to do the OCP, because we really think, okay, it is gonna change, and that's a fact. So I think that that's something that's useful.
Okay, Councillor Barkwell, Peak, and Patton.
I have to wonder how the market has failed us here, and whether we should maybe be going forward in two directions at once. We can zone and regulate the type of building we have in a place like the Eco Village, which I think we've all said was a good mix of townhouses and apartments and things. But also, I think we have to respond to the demand. If single family lots are what people want and will get built and sold, I don't think we should be doing anything to discourage that. It's still a housing unit. It's what people want. And the more there are, the supply should help the price. So if something like further expansion to the west comes out in our OCP review, and things that we can do to encourage that, because that's about the only direction we have left. Let's pursue that at the same time as we pursue all the infill and such that people say that we have to have. But I guess we'll have that debate during the OCP. Yeah, I see the heads nodding, yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit of a vicious circle. That's the thing. You only zone for a single detached, so that's all you're gonna get, and that's all what people want, and so. Anyway, Councillor Peak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to know how we go about encouraging different kinds of housing, and I don't understand all the terms, so I may use them with not complete knowledge, but where there's cottage groups or co-op housing, where there's a central green area and there are units built around it, or there are units where there are community centers that are within an area and there's a green area for those cluster of homes. I don't know what those are called, but those are options that are different than what we have now. So when we're looking forward to how we plan what we will do in our OCP, I want us to do a little more understanding and delving into those opportunities so that we do encourage a mix, and maybe those units are less expensive than what we are presently seeing come on the market, because construction costs are not going to go down. There's a lot of fixed things that we can see that are going to happen. Yet we have done a review to reduce our red tape. We're continuing to keep that review in mind as we move forward. And as we have new staff on, we're reviewing how we do what we do. So we're doing those kind of things, but I want to be more cognizant of different opportunities as we work into the OCP. And if we aren't at the point of reviewing what we do to accept this report, but I like Councillor Betts, have some concerns about not stating about the limitations or the suppositions that were handed to us. And I think that should be included in the motion for adopting this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Patton.
Thank you, Worship. What comes to my mind is what we've done around this table in the last 2 years. When you talk about the number of units, we have Legion Village coming up, senior housing. We've got the food bank building going in across the street. We have Hunter's Hill, single-family dwellings in estate lots in phases 3, 4, and 5. We have the Dinsmore property that's another 40 units. We have the Eco Village up there, and off the top of my head, it was around 300 units or anyway. We have the RCMP site with those units over there. We have the Blagbourne subdivision that's gone through. Like, we have done a lot of work to initiate the construction of more housing within Summerland. But Councillor Peak hit it right on the head. If you don't have a developer that's got the deep pockets that wants to come forward and start building the product, then we can approve another 6 to 8 subdivisions or projects. But that doesn't mean that they're going to come to fruition because we don't have anybody to build them, right? So I think what we've done is phenomenal in this last 2 years on what we've brought to the table. Now we just have to work on what else we can do. And maybe there's going to be a more in-depth thought of how do we entice that builder, that developer into town? What can we do more to encourage more units to start? But I'm tell you the truth, the report is okay. I think though that we've already put a huge dent in the number of units already. And if you're talking 20 years, and look what we've done in 2. So anyways, it has its flaws, but I think as far as the OCP goes, that is a guiding document. That's all that document is. It is. It's numbers, and it's that's it is what it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Van Alphen.
Thank you. Question through to Brad, if I may. So do you see an opportunity here to manipulate the numbers? Like, because bear with me. There's a huge concern that age 14 to 0 is going to be a demographic that we're going to be losing. So if it was more of an apartment style or more affordable style homes, I'm thinking that there is an opportunity, being the best bedroom community in the Okanagan, to lure those younger people to Summerland because of affordability, and they're going to commute to their jobs regardless. And, is there a way to manipulate, looking at our OCP to keep that in our forefront? Because from what the stats are showing, I think the school district knew that already by looking at reconfiguring the schools here in Summerland. I don't want to see us keep going down that trend. So how can we look at a way to try to attract younger people into our community? And it's not jobs, so it's got to be affordability.
Your worship, to Councillor Van Alphen, yes, I don't like the word manipulate. I probably wouldn't have used that word because the methodology is kind of set and we can't change the numbers, but the numbers do give us really good guidance moving into the next OCP review. And that's why I think there is value in the report itself, in us setting up our discussion, heading as a community, getting into that OCP review is like, hey, this is the trend. You're right. We already were aware of this trend from recent decisions from the school district. They have done their own analysis as well. So how do we change that trend as a community? And that's where the OCP provides, an opportunity for us to explore what kind of community does Summerland want to be over the next 20 years, and how do we get there? And so if we want to be, target affordability, target young families, then we probably need to be doing things differently. And what do we need to do? I guess that would be the next kind of discussion.
I think that's the key. I think it's as was mentioned, the numbers are what they are if we continue doing what we've been doing. That doesn't mean we have to continue doing what we've been doing. We can do something different, and then the numbers will change. I think that's the way to look at it, right? Councillor Barkwell.
I agree with what Councillor Patton's been saying. He listed quite a number of projects and he still didn't list them all. You know, there's the police station and there's another one on Armstrong Avenue and there's one by the 7-Eleven but it depends on the market. And each time each project waits until it feels its time is right. But on the upside, there's a whole lot more there than there was 2 years ago. So it's not exactly a business as usual. There's a big change, a lot of it, or some of it anyway, because of what the province has brought in as far as new rules and such, and our own recognition or the world's recognition of what we need to be doing. So things will change and we can do more. And I guess we'll talk about it at the OCP discussion, what additional things we can do.
Just question, when you talk about a circular estimate, what is the definition of a circular estimate? Maybe Brendan, if you could explain that.
Sure. So when I refer to a circular estimate, I'm referring to the population growth projections or the household growth projections. And what I was trying to get at there is that the population projection is mostly based upon expected births and deaths based upon the existing demographic conditions, but there's an expected migration factor in there. And the province assumes basically that past migration patterns will hold into the future. And so if you're a community that believes in building lots of homes and being welcoming, you'll tend to have lots of in-migration. And so the province will think that you'll grow into the future. Whereas if you have a community that's somewhat more hostile to home building, you'll tend to have less in-migration, and the province thinks that you'll grow slower in the future. But if you then take those population forecasts and feed them back into your planning, then you're taking basically yesterday's planning and using it to guess how much housing that you'll need in the future, when that's not an independent variable. It doesn't say how much housing you need so much as how much housing you would need if you kept doing what you were doing. And so that's really what I want to emphasize when I say it's a circular variable. It's it's treating growth as an independent variable when in many respects, especially in places that have records of being growing populations, you'll get as much growth as you plan for that is the market will bear. So that's it.
Okay.
If that
I
makes sense.
see the circle there. CAO.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I know we're talking about future forecasting and trending, but in terms of the last actual census information, Council may recall, we're actually one of the only communities in the valley that has a growing under 14 population. I have the numbers in front of me. So in 2016, there were 1,430 kids, 14 and younger, making up 12.3% of the total population. And in 2021, there were 1,570, 14 and under, representing 13% of the population. So, I guess just back to the theme of you're doing stuff, and I think it's making a difference. And I think it's keeping on doing those things as you plan into the future as well. One of the only communities in the valley with a growing under 14 population.
Okay, Councillor Peak.
Thank you. When I look at the ways of changing what we do, I look at the fact that we need to maintain and increase our amenities. So I look at the partnership we did with the District 67 and we put in the skateboard park. We looked at the opportunity to add parks within our area. We look at even on the downtown core at how we would increase the density, knowing that by increasing the density, you sometimes get a greater growth in the economy because your commercial businesses do better. All those things work in our favor. So I think it's analyzing where those things will work in favor of keeping this a attractive, productive community. And even things like putting in the sidewalks, the activity lanes, the alternatives for people to get around the community. with bicycles and walking and carts, because we do have the older population, and the opportunity to create a better tree canopy, which cools our area. So I think there's lots of things that we need to do as add-ons to what we look at when we look at housing needs, because they're people needs as well.
Thank you. Mr. Dillon?
Your worship, to Councilor Piggy, if I can respond, there wasn't a question there. I just wanted to piggyback off of your comments, if I can, your worship. I do encourage all of council, if at your own time and leisure, to review the survey findings, attachment number 2, if you haven't already. There's a lot of great feedback from the community and the anecdotal information received through the comments boxes. So really good input for us. I think for both staff and council. And then one of the themes I kind of parsed from reviewing the survey findings is, that linkage between amenities and active transportation corridors and how that then combines to the need for housing. And people identified that in this survey, not the transportation master plan, which is a separate project being managed by us here at District Summerland, but they've actually said, no, in order to encourage more housing, more density in the downtown core, we should be building more active transportation corridors. That's from the Housing Needs Report survey. So it's some really knowledgeable feedback, I would say, from the community. And I guess I just want to encourage you to review all of that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I think we need a motion. There's a recommended one. Councillor Trainer? You're seconding, Councillor Melvin? Okay. Just get that up on the screen. There we go. Any further discussion? Councillor Peak?
Well, I really would like to see some language that acknowledges that there were suppositions and whatever other word we would put in. Yeah, that says something different than just that this report is received.
We want to, but to me, it's pretty accurate. We're receiving in accordance to the section of the Local Government Act that says we need to do it. That's what we're doing, really. Yeah, Councillor Trainer.
I think I understand where Councillor Peak's coming from. And I think that when we do our OCP, when we begin that review, I think at that time, we could definitely talk about this report and talk about the limitations then. And that way it's fresh in people's minds. If they're paying attention, we can present it as, hey, we did this because the province asked us to. There's quite a few limitations. We take some of the higher level stuff from it, some of the themes, and then we, include it in our big picture. I think that might be a time too, but that's just my thought.
Yeah, there's nothing in the resolution saying this is a guiding document. There's nothing that's saying that it's where we're going to live and die by it. It's just it's a report that for us to use as we see fit.
Thank you for the discussion.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? And none opposed, that carries. So moving on to the notices of motion, we've got a couple here. The first one from Councillor Barkwell regarding the gun range zoning. So I'll just turn that over to Councillor Barkwell. Sorry, I don't know if Brandon's still there, but thank you very much.
Okay, I see that the proposed resolution is on the board here. And a little background, which is there is that the Sportsman Association's had a heck of a time trying to renew their lease with the provincial government because of it's a non-conforming use, and it doesn't need to be. So this would simplify their life. One of the things that a non-conforming use is that there can be no improvements. You know, if your house is a non-conforming use, you can't add an extra bedroom because it's suddenly being changed on you to commercial or something like sometimes happens when they want to expand your commercial area. So this would deal with that. They have big ambitions. They would like to be able to provide better facilities and make their lives simpler for when the renewal comes up. And then the second part of this is that it's Crown land and it would make life a little bit easier perhaps for when the lease is renewed if it could be district-owned land and just deal directly with the council rather than some faceless bureaucrat in the province. Not that I intend to insult provincial bureaucrats, but it just would, you know, this is all about making things easier for the Sportsman Association.
Okay, thank you. Council, do we have any questions? I'm not sure if it'll make it easier for them, whether, you know, dealing with a faceless bureaucrat or dealing with who's ever occupying these council table. Yeah, so I'm not sure about that, but well, we can see what that involves, I guess. Councilor Barkle?
The Sportsman Association might stack the council chambers, you know, run for 16 run for election.
Okay, Councilor Peak?
I think this is an opportunity to encourage the volunteers that we have doing a great job in one particular area. And if it can simplify what they have to do in the future, I think that makes sense. The opportunity to investigate obtaining this lot will just give us a chance to have a look at that as well. So I'm in favor of this.
Councilor Betts?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You know, because it has this long history on the same piece of land that it's basically just been given a verbal okay this whole time, I can understand that in 2024, that is not really how things go any longer. And if there needs to be a change to accommodate this long-standing organization, I can get behind that. It's a reasonable thing in a modern bureaucratic era.
Do we know if the Sportsman Association would like the district to be on the land rather than the Crown land? Barkle?
I mean, it hasn't been a discussion at general meeting, you know, do we want to deal with the Crown or the district and things like that? But in my conversation with the president of the Sportsman Association, he was completely supportive of what we can do that might make things easier. I think in the research that the district does, the staff does on the second part, that's a sort of a second question, right? The first is the zoning, and I think there's no issue about that. But if they find out that, you know, there's a number of issues. Maybe they could buy that land, and it could be within the district. And that might change things too. So it's just a begin discussions on the question on the land ownership and the boundary, or not, it's not a boundary change, it's within our boundaries, but the tenure. Yeah.
I know they're two completely different properties, but my only kind of experience on this is when I was on the board of the Rackets Club, and the thought of, well, at the time, the district did want to take over that piece of Crown land, that the Rackets Club, and that was a nightmare scenario for the Racket Club because they knew that it essentially meant the end of the club, and because there was no trust in the municipality that they would keep what's there, that they would be developing that land. Now, granted, it's a different. Lake Shore is different than up in the hills, but you don't know 50 years from now what a future municipality plans will do. Whereas you could probably bet 50 years from now, Crown land is still going to be Crown land, and nothing's going to change much. So I just say you kind of have to be careful what you wish for a little bit here. And that's not necessarily going to solve any problems just because the district owns that land. Now, if they could sell it to the Sportsman Association, and they could somehow buy it, I think, that would be, that would be much better guarantee for them. Councillor Markle.
You raise an interesting point, but I kind of think that was a unique situation, and it may never have, I guess, it depends on the council of the day. I think you were dealing with a staff member of the day. So I feel that that's a pretty unique situation you're referring to, long before our time. So it's up to the Sportsman Association and their discussions with staff.
Councillor Betts.
Thank you. This question is actually for Brad, the Director of Development and Planning. What is your take on this proposed change in zoning?
Your worship, to Councillor Betts, the first part of the resolution, I don't think staff has any concerns with. It is a historical non-conforming use that's been there for years. Before we even had a zoning bylaw probably in place, that gun range has been there. I think that, yeah, this will allow for ease for the gun range moving forward, for if they wanted to expand their use, that would be an area of concern with our zoning bylaw if they were wanting to do that. So for the zoning part of it, I think it's something we can administer. We would treat it as like a separate zoning application and process it normally and bring it back in front of council on that basis.
Okay, so you've brought the motion forward. We need a seconder. Councillor Van Alphen. Any further discussion? Okay. Councillor Betts and then Barkle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was actually hoping to amend so that this would be two different motions.
Yep, we can split it. We don't have to, we can call it, right? We can split it and just vote on them separately. That's fine. Councillor Barkle.
Sorry, Mayor Holmes, but it's already on the floor.
But you can vote on a motion separately, even if it's on the floor. You just vote for one. If it's if it's already in two parts, right?
No, because it would be one motion, even if it's two parts, it's one motion, so we would have to consider them.
Well, we do it on the RDS all the time. We have motions on the floor and somebody just says, can we split that motion and vote on each section separately? And it's no problem. I think you can do that. You can vote on any motion, you can vote on separate parts separately. I don't know, then, they're doing it wrong in the RDS, but that's the way we do it. We'll get back to you on that.
Okay.
Councillor Barkle, then Councillor Peak.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense to me either, to be able to vote separately on the two parts of this motion. We should either defeat it if you want to do that, or I don't know the process for withdrawing the motion and presenting it differently. But I was just going to, I've forgotten what the main point was, but I was going to also comment that it's been there for, when you talk about historical use, it's like predates the Second World War for sure. And it could have been the first, because, well, and then, so this is, they need to protect their interests from encroaching development as well. So I know what my question was. I never thought about it before. Would this zoning change require an OCP change as well? And so we'll have to have a public hearing?
Mr. Delvin?
Through your worship, to Councillor Barkle, I would say no. What we would do, most likely, it's, I think, forestry grazing zone right now. We would keep that forestry grazing zoning, and that would be also the same OCP land use designation, just put a site-specific amendment to allow for a gun range on this specific property. So, no.
Okay, Councillor Peak?
I would prefer to keep this clean and clear, and I would defeat the motion as presented and then bring it back as two parts.
I would say you couldn't bring it back because we just defeated it. Because I could bring it back, but at the next meeting, right? because it's the exact same motion, the exact same wording we would be voting on. So, you know, you're defeating a motion and then bringing it back, and you're bringing back the exact same motion that you've just defeated. That doesn't make sense either, right? I'm not trying to be pedantic or be annoying here. I just think that's process.
Sorry, I'm just trying to think this through. I think the way the motion's written, because it says and that, it would be considered all in one. I'm not sure how the RDOS words their motions, and I'm not saying they're wrong. It's something I haven't come across or experienced. I think we would have to vote on it all in one. Is it possible that an amendment to the second part would satisfy what council was thinking?
I don't really know what council was thinking. I'm fine with it the way it is, but we'll go with who's first, Councillor Barkle, then Councillor Patton.
Before we go to any complicated measures here, let's perhaps Councillor Betts could enlighten us to what her concern is, and it sounds like, you know, and the necessity to separate the motions, because it's, you know, it's just, they're directed to investigate. It doesn't, there's no commitments here, so I don't see any real reason to be concerned, but perhaps she can explain her concerns. Take it from there.
Yep, go ahead.
Thank you for asking. I mean, I guess, like you're saying, the investigation doesn't commit us to a purchase. It's just in light of the work that we've done on our land ownership that don't believe that this fit within that. And so it's outside of my scope of understanding the land disposal study.
Thank you. Councillor Patton?
Thank you, Worship. Kendra, could I make a friendly amendment where, if agreeable to Councillor Barkwell, we just remove and that?
That's
I think she just said it was over. She's okay with it.
That doesn't address the root of the problem.
Through the chair to Councillor Patton, I don't think that would help. Maybe if we could just take 5 minutes so I could review the council procedure bylaw quickly and Robert's Rules of Orders to figure out the best way forward.
Okay, I have a question of Mr. Dolvin, I guess. What is involved in investigating purchase of the lot?
I think investigate is quite broad. I think I know I'll have to chat further with our CEO here about what we're going to be doing to report back to council. I assume we're going to have conversations with provincial bureaucrats to understand their process for disposition in this request, and probably lay out a process that we could report back to council on.
So it might be good information to have anyway for other Crown properties that we may or may not have interest in. No? Councillor Barkle? Councillor?
Yes, you know, the report that Councillor Betts refers to as a land acquisition and land disposition and acquisition study, and it only dealt with the properties that they were aware of at the time. So I don't really see it as relevant to the question here. And I think we should just go, you know, charge ahead and have a vote.
Councillor Peak?
I too wondered, as the mayor did, about, I was concerned about the capacity for looking at the second half. If it was considered that that information could be valuable in the future, not just for this property, then I have a little more comfort in having that looked at. But we often talk about what our staff have to do already. This is a supposition that maybe the rifle group is interested in acquiring the land. I'm not clear that they've actually said that, so I just had a capacity problem.
Okay, well, I'm gonna charge ahead and call the vote on the whole thing. I do think, though, if somebody wants to be able to split the vote, they should be able to split the vote. That's my understanding. But we'll just vote on the whole thing. Okay? Um, You can live with that, Councilor Bennett?
I don't know what else to do.
Yeah, okay. So I'll call the question, corporate officer?
I was gonna say the only other option you could do, and just without knowing, so I'm again not saying if this is wrong, the only other thing I can think of right now is you could put forward an amendment to remove the second part of the motion, should you choose. And then see if that's supported by another member of council. I would then amend the motion to really only be the first part of the motion if you're not comfortable with the second part of the direction.
You wish to bring that amendment?
I would bring that amendment forward to remove the second part of the motion.
And do I have a seconder for that? Councilor Peak? Okay, so a discussion on the amendment. Any discussion on the amendment? We've kind of already beat it around a little bit. Yeah, Councilor Betts?
Thank you. I'm just not seeing, I'm not seeing the Summerland gun range group asking for this. So I feel like we're asking staff to do work without actually seeing a request. You said you heard from one person in one discussion. To me, that doesn't make a council decision to instruct our staff to do an investigation. It's too much for me. But I'm willing to hear if they are interested, that they could come forward and ask about it. And then I would be interested in that discussion.
Okay, Councilor Barkwell?
Well, my understanding, and perhaps staff will correct me, is that this is not a big undertaking. It's a few phone calls to find out what would be involved. And then, maybe from there, it would involve cooperation with the district, with the Sportsman Association. I just don't see it as a big deal. That's all. Just to look into it, make a few inquiries and take it from there. You know, the gun club really don't know if they want to, if that would be a good option until more information is provided and staff and a few queries from staff would help explain it to them. I couldn't, in my discussions with the president, really give them any knowledge. It has to come from further in-depth investigation.
Thank you, CEO.
Thank you, your worship. I tend to agree with Councillor Barkwell in those early steps. Pretty simple. Whether it's in the beginning at the exploratory stage or later on, I do suspect the province will want us to consult with the Penticton Indian Band and perhaps others. In other areas where we've involved areas of Crown land in the district, there's been sometimes as much as 19 First Nations that have to be consulted because of overlapping claims.
Okay, Councilor Turner?
Oh, I was just gonna say, it doesn't have to be a formal report, right? Like you can just report back to us with what you found in a high-level investigation.
Thank you, through the mayor. I think we'd bring back a formal report. Yeah.
Okay, I'll call a question on the amendment. That's to remove the second part. All in favor of removing the amendment? All opposed? That's the motion is defeated. You're opposed, Councilor Patton? Yeah, okay, that's defeated. 2 in favor. So now I'll call a question on the full item, full motion. All in favor? And any opposed? Councilor Peak and Betts opposed. You got everybody for both? Okay, so that motion carries. Okay, good discussion. Moving on to second notice of motion from Deputy Mayor Trainer regarding a commercial vehicles
Yeah, hopefully this one is relatively straightforward. So I had a resident contact me a couple times over the last year. And she was just concerned about the fact that Summerland does not have a bylaw to restrict the number of commercial vehicles that you can park on a residential lot. She has a neighbor who tends to park when I last talked to her, between about 4 to 7 vehicles on this property. And so she did complain to bylaw, and bylaw said we don't have the we don't have a correct bylaw in order to restrict that. So she asked if that's something that I would bring forward to council for consideration, that we look at that. I also talked to Darren, and Darren said our bylaw services, and he said that this makes complete sense to him as well. So yeah, that's why I just brought it forward to be part of our review next year, and to just see what other communities are doing. And, you know, I think that if we don't have a limit on the number of commercial vehicles allowed to be parked on residential properties, it can affect the looks of neighbors or neighborhoods, and it can also create more conflict between neighbors. So it's just a way of reducing that.
Okay, thank you. So you want to bring that forward?
Yeah, I'll bring that forward.
So I get a seconder, then we have discussion. Councillor Van Elfen seconding. Okay, any questions? Councillor Barkle.
Would we restrict this to residential properties, or is there other types of zoning that would be applicable to agriculture?
My intent with this is just residential. Yeah. And interesting, just one other side note that we can make when we do eventually talk about this. Apparently, we don't have a restriction for the number of licensed vehicles that are allowed to be on property as well. So that might be something that we can consider, but that's not part of this. That was just something that Darren was mentioning to me today. So fuller review in the new year.
Okay, and this would be part of our regular zoning bylaw review that we do every year. Yeah. Okay. Councillor Peak.
I think this makes perfectly good sense. We can do it.
Okay. Any other comments, discussion? No, I'll call the question. All in favor? And none opposed. That carries. Any notices of motion for the future? No. Council reports. Anybody have anything to report? Councillor Peak.
I want to thank the community, being the downtown merchants and the chamber, for sponsoring a afternoon event for the High Street for Halloween ghosts and goalies. It was a great time, and it's a nice opportunity for the younger children to get out and around while it's still light. And I want to commend the museum on their haunted museum. Our granddaughter volunteered her services as a witch that night, as she did last year. It was well attended, and I went in late when I went to pick her up and went through it, and they scared the heck out of me on a couple of corners. So they did a really good job. Thank you. We also attended our museum board as representatives in this past week.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Trainer?
Yeah, I'll just quickly add to Councillor Peak. I went to the museum as well with my little kids and the late scary one, and they loved it. And they did a really good job there. And I just want to give the museum props for really trying to reach a new demographic in our community. Like, they are really going above and beyond. They have a really good volunteer team and really good staff team. And I just think that they really offer Summerlanders a unique experience. Like, no one else in the belt, like none of the other museums did that. And I'm sure they're all doing something as well. But I just wanted to give them a shout out, because I noticed their effort, and I think the community does as well. And then also the downtown, all the merchants who opened their doors. I took my kids trick-or-treating and they loved it. And most of them had all of their candy gone. So this event is growing every year. And it's a really good option for kids who might not want to go out trick or treating at night. It also gets them to spend time downtown, to meet all the store owners. So it's a really good way to build community. So well done to all those stores.
Thank you. Councilman Elfin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to say thank you to our CEO. I attended a Diwali event at the Hindu temple in Trout Creek, and they raved about the district of Summerland and working with our local fire department for their fireworks permit. They just always have nothing but great things to say about the district. And it was an incredibly well-attended event. It's probably the largest one I've ever attended. But it was a great evening. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. No one else? Then I'll call for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Patton, Councillor Peak, all in favor? That carries.